Well, our debate tonight is going to be looking at the purpose of East Contemporary Art Collection, and we've got a number of people with us. On the right-hand side, another David Page, who worked at the Art and Design Faculty of North East London Polytechnic. No?
No, that was years ago.
That was years ago, but
No,
once
I'm
upon a
retired.
time. One
I'm
a time.
just a painter.
Just a painter. Not sure about the word just, but there we are. But at one point was there. And on my immediate right, Nicholas Usherwood, curator, art critic, and writer on contemporary art and culture, whose contributions include The Guardian, The Times, The Telegraph, Sunday Times, Arts Review, and so on. So that's Nicholas. On the far left, Eileen Haring-Wood, who's artistic director for the Haring-Wood Projects, who's recently moved or relocated from London to Suffolk. And on my immediate left, Simon Carter, who's one of the people who's helped to bring East Contemporary art here to UCS and describes himself as a painter's painter. Would that be fair?
That's what everybody says. I don't know quite.
It's what it says.
It's what it says.
Sounds good. There we are. So we're going to have a number of questions we're going to discuss, and then we're going to open up questions to the floor. So I think the first question that we need to discuss is why, here we are sitting in the Waterfront building overlooking the marina. Why does University Campus Suffolk need a contemporary art collection?
I mean, in I suppose absolute terms, you could say, well, it doesn't. You don't need an art collection because, for instance, if someone was ill and the choice is between a painting and some operating equipment at a local hospital, you're going to opt for the operating equipment because that's immediately going to be of benefit to that person. But if also you look at studies of placing art in hospitals, a good environment, people being kind to you, glimpse of the garden or the countryside, having paintings, music around, it actually speeds the healing process. So you actually spend less time in hospital. So it's not quite as simple as either hospitals, universities, or frivolous kind of arts, because the arts actually do something, but it's less tangible. It's not one of those things that you can necessarily tick the boxes as government would wish.
Right, okay.
So I think you do need an art, but I can't tell you why.
Well, it's an interesting question for me as you said, a relative newcomer to Suffolk, but having dealt with a number of universities in my work as an artistic director in collaborative projects, I think any art form that can be accessible to not just the students but the wider community in which the university lives is a serious asset. So that any art form, anything that draws people in and helps to stimulate creativity and imagination has to be a good thing.
I'm talking more actually just in intensely personal terms, and having worked in art schools in the past. But I think if you have an art school in a building like this, then the fact is there should be the very basic thing like an orchestra, like a library, anything else. There should really be a collection here which is available for students apart from anything else. It's a basic core resource. But I think the other thing that has changed really is that the visual arts, when I first started working in the arts back in the 70s and 80s, visual arts are quite sort of marginalised in a way, and I think now everyone is much more interested. There's a much bigger audience for the visual arts. It's everywhere in our culture. We have the Reith Lectures and Grace and Perry. Everyone, in a sense, has suddenly got aware of the arts. And so I think any institution which is creating arts, making arts, should have, almost by definition, a collection. I think if they haven't, then they are actually minus. They're lacking in some way. And I think that's the real core of the thing. And this is I don't know any other thing quite like this collection. And you've got, in East Anglia, you've got a more academic collection. Here you've got something which is post-2000 so it's a modern collection. And I think in those terms that's very good. And also I like the way that it's not taking one critical line, it's taking a broad base of painting, of all the arts. So I think in all those terms, yes, I think this is, you shouldn't be without one. Every good university should have one, I think.
Right.
Especially one involved with the visual arts. And I'll pass on to David.
Yes, David?
We have to have something in front of us, I think.
We do.
I think that whenever you set up some kind of organisation, which is what this is, for people who work in very isolated ways, you're actually making it possible for them to get together and get to know who they are. I mean, most of us who live in Norfolk and Suffolk know that there are lots of other artists around, and on many occasions we don't know who they are or what they do, and whenever we set something or other up, that makes it possible for everybody to develop their sense of identity, group identity rather than personal identity. So on a social basis, it's very good for the trade, so to speak. The other part of it is that fine art is just part of a whole spectrum which contributes to what you can call the economic arts, with, you know, film, television and all that kind of thing at the top. And none of it will work unless the base is working.
Absolutely.
And the more you can do to make people at ease and able to earn at the base, the better it is. So there is also a sense in which such a collection is a sort of shop front for the small proportion of us who are doing a small part of what's a very large pyramid that is the arts.
We've recently moved from, I think, the far west to what our Welsh friends call the flatlands of the east. Hope you'll forgive us for describing it like that. And I think there's something really rather exciting about the arts here in East Anglia. And I wonder if the panellists could perhaps say what they find is distinctive and exciting about contemporary art and contemporary arts here in the east of England.
Well, I think it's a very simple one, really, is that I've worked part of the time in London, part of the time up in East Anglia, sort of 60-40%. And I think the thing I've been particularly struck with up here is the sheer range and variety. I mean, there's always been a long tradition historically that's in a way almost taken for granted and not worth repeating in this context. But I was very taken, my wife was a painter, and I've been very taken with the sheer range and variety right across the board, and the number of artists working here in every different kind of style, from YBAs to traditional, mainstream, whatever you like to call it, in every kind of medium, photographers, installation, the lot. So in a way there's been this extraordinary, and it's everywhere you go, there's a huge variety, I mean, there's a sheer weight of them. I think I'm always saying to people that in England, I think per square mile, there must be more really good artists than practically any other country I can think of in Europe. And taking up what David was saying just now about a pyramid, I think that is extraordinarily healthy in a way, because you actually have this very broad base, so you have lots of, if you like, working everyday artists, then you have above that, you don't have a healthy pyramid. You don't have if you don't have the tip of the pyramid with really good artists, they don't exist unless you've got a really good base under that. That it comes out of that. Governments don't understand this. They think you just have great artists just emerge out of a clear blue sky and that's it. So what you get here is, in a sense, is every kind of artist work at all sorts of levels. So I think in those terms, it's a very healthy pyramidal structure and very interesting stuff going on. And of course, I think just at another level, what is also very exciting is the astonishing range of galleries of every kind. You've got Colchester with First, you've got all these institutions, you've got galleries, you've got commercial galleries, you've got art trails, you've got open studios, you've got incredible range of activity. I'm not saying it doesn't happen in other parts of the country, but it's in sheer sort of scope and range of it and numbers. It's absolutely phenomenal. I don't quite know anything like it in those terms. So I think those are the things. And out of that, if you've got that kind of melting pot, then you're going to have some very exciting stuff coming up out of the top. And And I think there's general buzz about visual arts here, which is very good.
All I was going to say, there is a lot going on in East Anglia. I think you get the nearer to the coast you get, the more kind of weight of artists there seem to be piling up. All I was going to say in connection with this, Robert and I had talked to another gallery. I better not say who they are, but in another part of the country, a long way from here. We talked to another gallery about this kind of model. And what they said to us, they said there's not enough good artists working to make it work. So we're very, I don't think, because we work here and because we're sort of beavering away in the studios and got our heads down, we don't notice, but I think we've got a huge amount of very high quality artists working in the region.
Do you think there's something distinctive about
Yes,
the art of the East?
I'm not sure there is. I think like landscape painting comes out of the kind of flatlands. If you look at Northern Europe, like the North French coast, Belgium, Holland, East Anglia, there's something that in those sort of empty spaces that generates some kind of interest in looking out. Whereas the landscapes that you would think would generate that, like the Scotland or the Alps or the sort of Pyrenees, the more dramatic landscapes don't seem to generate that. So there's a very strong landscape tradition in East Anglia, but whether that goes towards a distinctive look to East Anglian art, I don't know. I think it's quite diverse. I think if you came to the last exhibition, see this exhibition, and then there'll be another one next year to show the complete collection. It's quite a range of stuff, so I don't think there's necessarily a distinct look. But I might be wrong on that one, I don't know.
That'd be interesting, because I think in sort of Pembrokeshire you get
Yes.
a focus on sort of landscapes.
Yes, and you head down into Cornwall, and you trip over artists in Cornwall, don't you? So, yeah, it's not just here.
No.
But I think we're quite fortunate in the number of artists we've got working.
Okay. Eileen,
Well, I'm only learning about the specifics of the art in East Anglia, but I find that one thing that is distinctive and possibly exciting is that we're not overwhelmed by any one particular art form or artist. I suppose is Maggie Hamling our best known East Anglian artist? I don't know. She's
West End
that's a
contemporary.
question. So in some ways, I think what's distinctive and very exciting is that the playing field is quite open for new and emerging artists to kind of really push the arts further into the public eye.
If I take it from a slightly different angle, picking up on what Simon said about open spaces, the reason why so many of us are here is because back in the 60s and 70s, and to some extent earlier than that, East Anglia was somewhere you could go to where there was space. Norfolk was still losing population in the 70s. There were abandoned farms, there were barns, there were buildings that could be put to use. And the one thing that painters and sculptors and potters and weavers and whatnot want is somewhere where you can work and where there's room to expand. So a very large number of people moved up, and you can see that they moved up in waves. That's the positive side of it. So there's a lot of us here now. And the negative side of it is that all that is over. The people who are moving in now are retired solicitors, oil men, people like that. Most of the houses and spaces that we all own are spaces which we couldn't afford to buy if we were trying to do it now. So here is a sort of cautionary word. Watch it while you can. It will last as long as we're alive, and the next generation maybe, and then it'll move to Newcastle, it'll move to the Rust Belt, somewhere where there's space and you can get on with your work. Don't blink.
The microphone back, please.
I just wanted to say one very quick
Yes.
thing in passing, which is nothing to what David was saying, but I just think the other thing I think which is very important, to up with what we've said so far, is that we tend to have in an art culture, a very London-centric art culture, generally speaking, and everything is seen in terms of London. I've been as much as I've written, I've tried to write and point out the extraordinary levels of activity that are going on outside, which very rarely get any acknowledgement in the press at all. And I think there needs to be these counterbalances, wherever they are, wherever they happen, are very important. So in those terms, an initiative like this, I think, is terrifically important, because it isn't London. And London, actually, I would say, is one of the most parochial places in Europe. It thinks it knows it all, it doesn't know it all. I'm not saying we know it all, but it knows it no better than we do. And I think that's just worth saying.
Last week, some of us were thinking about the heritage business. I'm actually an archaeologist by background. And one of the points that was being made by one of the government's special advisors was that funding in the arts has gone up, funding for heritage has gone down, and the focus was on the economy. And what I think we could explore usefully is, how do we perceive the ways that the arts can contribute to the economy of the eastern region?
The amount of work which is going on up here pulls people in, and would pull more people in if more people knew about it. Where I live, which is in Harleston, we set up our own art trail. It'll be 10 years old next year. And we set it up because we didn't much like the Norfolk open studios, because it was far too big and it was run from the top. It was administered. And every year there was a big map of Norfolk that looked as though it had got measles. And if you had driven around very, very fast, you might have done sort of 10% of the number of people who were showing. And there wasn't really any access criterion except come up with your 90 quid and you're in. So a lot of people were disappointed going to places to look at things and finding there wasn't really anything much to look at. And we set something up which was artist directed, and one of the things that I like about this operation is it's the artists who are providing the drive rather than some kind of organisation. The art trail that we set up drew people in. And I've got figures here. The first year when we set it up, we got about 2,100 visitors. That was 3 weekends of open studios, and we sold about £6,400 worth of work. In 2011, we had about 4,600 visitors, and we sold about £26,000 worth of work. Now, that money circulates in the community on the whole. I mean, it's not, people don't come from the other end of the UK to look at local open studios, but they do come from a lot of areas locally where people before wouldn't have thought about buying art. And through this process, we've accustomed people to the idea that art is there and you can actually buy some if you want. And people now do. So I think we are economically doing quite a lot just in that sort of small way. And then it goes up from there, up the pyramid.
A little bit of flavoured promotion. My close friend and colleague, Benjamin Barber, has written a book called If Mayors Rule the World. And one of his chapters is cultural cities in a multicultural world. And he's quoted as saying that at an international conference in 2010, a featured study showed that for every $100 invested in arts and culture, $249 was added to the GDP. That every 3 jobs created in the arts sector yielded 2 more in the private sector. And he goes on and on. So the business of art, I think it's been proved many, many times in many, many places that it does generate income. I've been involved in projects, not so much talking about the art and regeneration, how you can regenerate an area that's struggling, by making studio space or living space available to artists at reasonable rates. And then you start the coffee shop, and then the rents go up. And I mean, that's a whole other side of it, but it's also, I think, an important part of what could, possibly is already happening in East Anglia.
Simon.
I didn't realise I was being such a useful member of society, but apparently I am.
Arts and humanities.
Yeah, it's news to me. No, I mean, yeah, I guess it would have a hard job. I mean, those figures, they're the kind of figures the government needs to justify spend on arts, but I mean, those kind of figures are not really available to me. I mean, all you're doing is working away, and yeah, there is a community of artists who have got, actually we've sort of orchestrated to allow this to happen. So I guess, I mean, one of our ideas was it's a tourist draw as well. I mean, in the same way that there's 11 constable paintings up at the mansion in Ipswich, which people come and see. There's 2 of the very best constable paintings in the country there. Hopefully, years to come, anybody who wants to research what's happening in 21st century art in East Anglia will come here to look at it. So that's about as far as my knowledge goes, I think.
Okay, that's fine.
I think most of the points we made, I'd just like to sort of add to what David has said, because he's very modest in terms of the efforts he's made. But I think just trying to get local government, for example, to recognise what art does bring. He tried, for example, my wife is part of the train that David set up. And I mean, he's done huge efforts with South Norfolk to try and get them to support us, give us some sort of funding to keep the thing going, and get met with an absolute blank wall by and large, or go away or just sort yourselves out and you can do it. So I do think that there is a big battle still to be fought in terms of trying to get government at all levels, from local government to regional to national government, to acknowledge that. I mean, that's part of a bigger national issue, which is still astonishingly, I mean, absolutely can't get it. Why it's so evident. You can see people coming around the trails that my wife's part of and David's part of. You see the sheer numbers of generation of that going into the local economy. You can't begin to understand why it isn't absolutely evident to everyone that this is adding something to it. It seems a peculiar kind of myopic view that the government has about what the arts, not just visual arts, but the arts do generally. But given what we've been saying about the sheer numbers of artists working up here, and the amount of sales generated that David's been quoting and can be replicated all over this. I mean, there are hundreds of these trails, hundreds of open studios going on, literally thousands of artists. It would be very interesting to do an absolute overall survey and find out just how much money was coming out of that, and a proper economic survey of that hasn't been done that I'm aware of, and just to see what that must be bringing into tourism in the area, and why people are coming around. We've had people coming around studios from Holland and places like that. I mean, why not? You know, it's a very exciting, lovely places, great art, interesting things to see. What's the problem?
I think people don't put things together, because I think the cultural industries are about 10% of GDP. The government is very well aware that selling TV series abroad brings money in. They don't connect that with all the other things that go on that have to contribute to it.
Thank you. Let's thinking about the sort of wider sort of technologies. I was wondering about how do contemporary technologies and means of communication affect the way that we present art in the 21st century?
The obvious is that many different types of art forms are more accessible to anyone not on the planet through technology. What I'm interested in this question is how you take art forms you go beyond the two-dimensional art form to performance art, any of the live arts, which can be represented through film. But it's different. I'm not answering this question very, very well, because I'm still thinking about it a lot, and I think the copyright's a whole other issue, but there is nothing you can never have the same experience of looking at something online, at a digital reproduction, than you can of looking at the actual work itself. And but to be able to reference it in any way is a good thing. But the ability to take the artwork and move it from one place to another so that people can have the live experience of artworks is what we should be working towards more.
I think what I'd like to emphasise is, in a way, with visual arts, is in a sense it's non-virtualness, in the sense that it's the actual physical experience, and you have so much in the way of screens and virtual worlds that the actual physical fact is something of art, is something that tends to get overlooked. So in those terms, I think that's my main point. And I think obviously there are all sorts of pressures on artists about how their work gets seen. I think if we think of Google images and those kind of things, I think that does pose a real problem, but I'm not sure what I feel or think about that. In one sense it's marvellous because it means that people are more visually aware. I think in financial terms there are probably repercussions there which come into another question we were talking about, in that artists like musicians could very easily lose out in those terms as well. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, I think, to be absolutely honest. And we're really very much at the beginning of the process. I mean, it obviously puts also great pressures on artists to make sure that they get their work on websites and promoted and put forward as well as possible. And I think that's very good for artists. But again, are they going to get paid? How do they get the money? How does it work for them? In those terms, I think there's all sorts of problems.
Well, I think it's revolutionary. When I was a young painter and I got interested in somebody's painting, I might have to wait a year or two before something came up in one of the few magazines that was reproducing people's work. And now I can go and Google somebody's name and I can look at what they're doing. And it may not be a perfect simulacrum of what they're doing, but it's pretty good. And at the same time, as other people have said, I mean, if you're producing work and it's being used, then you ought to be rewarded for it being used. And the people who've lost out appallingly are the musicians, who don't get the money for the plays. I think my son was telling me that one record of his has had, I think it was had 40,000 plays, and he made about 60 quid or something. There isn't any money coming out of there, because this is where the things don't get together. The government hasn't got together with all the other governments in Europe to insist that there is a direct line from people's work being used in the media and the actual person who's producing it getting something out of it that's livable on. I think musicians are in a very, very bad situation at the moment, because they depended on, at one stage, they depended on selling albums, which they now can't sell. And anybody can rip them off at any time. Artists never really expected to have their work shown anyway. Their view of it was, well, if, what would happen would be the local paper would say to you, well, we'll put your picture in here. You're pleased about that, aren't you? Lots of people are going to be able to look at your picture. Thank you very much. So, that is the sort of situation. The people right at the bottom of the pile are poets who never expected to make any money. But I think the digital revolution is a revolution, and it's either going to strangle everybody, or it can be kind of mastered and used.
One of the other things that it has also revolutionised is how artists organise themselves. Because I think this collection went from an idea over a cup of tea in Robert's garden about 18 months ago to actually being part 2 of the collection actually on display. It's happened in about 18 months. Previously, we'd have had to get slides of paintings done, wait to get them back, send them out, write letters. We sent an email out to about 20 artists initially, just to see whether this was a really stupid idea or not. And we had responses back within the day, within a couple of days. So we were sort of testing the idea out. Within a week, we got an idea that probably this wasn't a really stupid idea, that it might have a bit of sort of, it might actually work. Within a month, we'd got a sort of a rough list of artists coming together. And we can send images to each other, we can send emails. You can get the whole thing organised incredibly quickly at no cost at all. So Robert and I have, this has all been done at zero cost. Robert and I have earned nothing out of it and not spent very much money from it, apart from travelling around to meetings. So we can organise ourselves very cheaply and very quickly, which I think we should take advantage of.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think one last question from us before we I'll go over to the audience for questions is this wider question. How does a contemporary art collection like this engage with a much wider audience, whether it's in Ipswich or Suffolk or East Anglia?
Well, the first thing would be, if you've got a little old lady to attack one of the paintings with an umbrella on the grounds that it was disgraceful, you would immediately get into the press and people would pay attention. It's as crude as that at one level. If you want to get yourself mentioned, and a lot of you probably watched Organ the other night, it was the same sort of thing. How do you get people to discuss what you're doing? So coming down from that, you use anything in sight that will get people to pay attention and to get people involved in discussing. And there are things that go on that do call attention, like for instance, I don't know if any of you know the Big Draw, do you? My wife and I have been doing a big draw at the Guardian for the last 10 years or so. And so once a year you get all the kids coming in to draw, for those of you who don't know about it. And so you get artists and cartoonists and designers and people sitting down with kids and getting them to do things, and that creates a sort of liaison to try and bring people to something. But you do need publicity.
Okay.
And that's not so easy, as we all know, trying to get local media, radio, anyone. I've tried doing that on various things for our art trail up in Suffolk, and you don't even get a response. So that is something that works very hard at. But I would actually just reinforce really what David's been saying, that we have to try absolutely everything. I think what we're doing at this moment, having this kind of debate, is one good example of just that. That there have to be everything. I think there has to be a continuous round of activities and changes and things going on. If you just have the same collection all the time, people will just say, well, I know what that is, and they'll go away. You've got to keep things moving and shifting and changing all the time, and that requires quite a lot of work for somebody. I'm not sure who, the university or whoever, but that has to happen. But I think also one has to possibly look at things like outreach to schools, taking the building outside. If there's a way somehow or another, I'm just thinking of getting some of these collections out into the community in some way. That would be ever so helpful. I think if it just gets stuck in the building, so to speak, then you have problems. But I think it's hard work actually. I think galleries used to just put the work up and you expected people to come in the door, but that was 50 years ago. It doesn't work like that anymore, and I think it really has to be very proactive indeed, and every form and shape you can think of, the lot, even getting little old ladies poking pictures with their umbrellas maybe, but that's a bit too radical. But no, I think it requires several people taking it on and doing a lot of work to make things move.
But anything that takes the artwork out of the traditional art space, which for many, many people is completely excluding. We were talking about this before, that inviting people or expecting people to come through the doors of a university is challenging, and then to get through the university and then into something called a gallery space is a profound challenge. And a lot of my work over many years has been about getting artworks outside of traditional cultural institutions, the people who would never cross the threshold of a museum, and putting artworks into open spaces, and where you can use the notion of the democracy in public space for anyone to stand beside anyone else and look at a piece of work. And that shared experience in an open space that is not mediated by education, by another cultural meme is an important factor. And another thing I wanted to say was there's been various schemes, initiatives about allowing people to curate exhibitions, and if the idea of inviting individuals or students or anyone to have a look at this collection and invite them to make their own curatorial statement, which is a fantastic way of addressing issues of life, love, and the universe, and then to be able to allow that curated collection to move to schools, to estates, to offices, to government buildings, anywhere, is one of the ways that I think gives another layer of creativity and allows the imagination to work in a different way, and that's the bit that I would really counsel for.
Okay. Simon.
Yes, well, in conversations with the university, we have talked about some of these ideas. I like the idea of inviting people to curate exhibitions from it, and it will be good to see the collection out sort of in the wider world, and I'm sure it will be. One of the sort of slightly different angle on this, when a group of us sort of initially talked about this, and then we sort of wrote emails off to people. We moved from what people accept and do know, like the Constable, Gainsborough, Munnings, sort of the artists, the recognised artists that worked in East Anglia, through to Maggie Hambling, and then there's Christopher Brun had a studio here for a while. So it's moving from what people know and accept through to something more contemporary, people don't know about, maybe find it slightly more challenging to accept. So I think moving from what one knows to what one doesn't know is the way to go about it, rather than just springing sort of something fully formed and unsuspecting in public.
Okay, right, thank you. Well, I think we've heard some really interesting and provocative comments coming from our panel, but now's your opportunity to ask the panel the questions that you've been longing to ask. So if I can invite you to sort of perhaps indicate if you'd like to ask a question.
And we have a number of really fantastic opportunities to actually use that space to exhibit work. There's no commission, it's free to use, and I'm finding it like, what is the best way to get these people who are exhibiting here now to really engage with that space? Do any of you have any suggestions?
Well, I think you need organisations. You need clustering of people, don't you?
Yeah.
And you need information going out in a circle so that everybody in that particular group knows what's going on. I mean, it's all very simple and very quick. Our problem is keeping people out, I think.
Well, it's only just been launched, so.
There are a lot more people who want to exhibit work where I come from than there are places for them to show. And, you say, look, we've got a shop front here, would you like to show pictures in it? And hey, presto, the thing will be full. But it goes out on, email and etc.
Could I ask how many people in this room know about this initiative? Show of hands? Third? Less? Well, now, everybody should have raised their hands because you know about it now. But the fact that you didn't know about it says, what does that say to you?
It says to me that, for me, I think I would like to reach out to artists in particular, but also I need to be very aware that there's other creative industries. But yeah, I think it is getting out. I think maybe there's like little ripples that will flow from here or over here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
What I was wondering was whether the panel had any thoughts about how the collection should move forward, how it would expand, and in what way that would make the collection very specific or useful or purposeful.
I mean, we've got, I think there's about 100 artists involved in this at the moment. And I mean, when we've handed it over to yourselves, and it's up to the university to decide those. From my point of view, I think an acquisitions committee should be set up, and but that's going to depend upon how the university wants to acquire work. But I mean, all we've done is give the foundation of a collection which is biased towards painting, I must say. So it's not just a collection of the physical objects, it's a collection of practicing artists as well. So there's an engagement with the wider community of the artists. But yeah, I think that's the acquisitions policy is up to the university. I think there should be an acquisitions committee and then just see where it goes forward from there. But it's, I guess as it develops, it will become more moulded to the university. And also, one of the things I'd aspire it to be is also somewhere that could accept archives of artists' work. So, you know, an artist could feel reassured that they could give an archive of their past work to the university and it'd be used for research in the future.